The flour had been milled in Western Europe from European wheat. Curiously, 3 of the bags in the lot had slash marks. Are they at that table? Investigation, reduce spending. We don't really have a problem with it. Was the CIA responsible for the poisoning deaths of 17 Jamaicans in 1976? Then Prime Minister Michael Manley certainly thought so, and he was not alone. According to a New York Times report, at least 17 Jamaicans died after consuming contaminated flour traced to a shipment of the Lionhead brand that arrived in the country from West Germany. A child and an adult were the first to die in one of the worst cases of food poisoning in Jamaica's history. About 78 others became ill after consuming the imported flour that was later found to have been contaminated by the insecticide parathion. Now, what was curious about that case is that parathion had been banned in Jamaica for about 5 years at that time. And there had also been a previous case of flour poisoning by parathion in 1968 when 5 people died and about 50 became ill. Investigations later found that all the patients had consumed wheat flour from a single lot consisting of 5,264 cotton bags. The flour had been milled in Western Europe from European wheat and carried in trucks to a dockside warehouse where it was loaded aboard the ship after 2 to 5 days of storage. When the flour made its way to Jamaica, it had moved from the quayside to the outbreak locations along separate routes through 2 import houses. Site inspections and review of shipping records suggest that the likely point of contamination was the European port where foodstuffs and insecticides were stored in the same warehouse. Curiously, 3 of the bags in the lot had slash marks. Now, the timing of this incident couldn't be more suspect because it was only a few weeks earlier that U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger had visited Jamaica and asked then Prime Minister Michael Manley to abandon his nationalistic agenda. He wanted to buy out 51% of the foreign bauxite mining operations and planned, along with Mexico and Venezuela, to build an international aluminum processing complex outside the multinational system. But Manley's nationalism plan, which included increasing access to healthcare, education, and, very importantly, land reform, did not sit well with the United States. Manley was threatened to either abandon his agenda or risk the removal of the $100 million line of credit promised by the U.S. The poisoning was one of many incidents that had Michael Manley convinced that the U.S. government was out to get him. In 1977, the U.S. Embassy in Jamaica sent a telegram to the Department of State in which they said, Prime Minister still believes some CIA people were trying to destabilize his government and perhaps even assassinate him last year. With respect to the Duncan poisoning, he said he's satisfied that the CIA had nothing to do with it, but he is convinced that some of the same elements that were involved in the destabilization effort last year were also involved in the poisoning. Michael Manley would later say, looking back at the events of 1976, I have no doubt that the CIA was active in Jamaica that year and was working through its own agents to destabilize us. As history would have it, Michael Manley was right to be suspicious. The U.S. Office of Historian has a document that's listed under its Foreign Relations title 1977 to 1980, Mexico, Cuba, and the Caribbean. Memo 197 for members of the Special Coordination Committee. Subject, Covert Action Options for Jamaica. This paper proposes a covert action program in Jamaica. It has been prepared by CIA as a means of countering Soviet and Cuban moves to gain control over Jamaican policies and to expand their influence in the Caribbean. Our ultimate aim is either the political defeat of Manley and the replacement of his government with one more friendly to the U.S., and appreciative of U.S. interests, or at a minimum, the application of enough pressure on Manley and his People's National Party to force moderation of their foreign policy, particularly a reversal of the trend towards closer ties with Cuba and the Soviet Union. And the memo proposes several actions that they may take. Option number 1, unilateral. Establish direct confidential contact with Edward Seaga, the leader of the main opposition party, the Jamaica Labour Party, and also provide guidance, assistance, and funds to the JLP in the upcoming national election campaign. Option number 2, through the international network of covert action assets, call for retention of democratic institutes in Jamaica, condemn Manley's close ties with the Cubans and Soviets, and expose Manley's efforts to suppress political freedom and prevent free elections. And there are other historical documents which shows that the Gleaner Company newspaper and several local religious and community organizations were utilized in this option too. These are documented facts. Now, despite the existence of this memorandum and several declassified CIA documents, the agency continues to insist that it was not involved in any destabilization efforts in Jamaica. And there has been no distinct evidence that has tied the agency to the flour poisoning incident in 1976. But all these coincidences have led many historians to believe not only in CIA involvement, but that high-level U.S. government officials had signed off on the destabilization effort that led to the massive defeat of Michael Manley in 1980 and the propelling of Edward Seaga into government.